He shattered the illusion of safety, a handsome, charming law student hiding a monster within. In the 1970s, America was optimistic, a world where a well-dressed young man with a smile could be trusted. Bundy weaponized that trust. Beneath his promising life, a disturbing pattern emerged. Women vanished from college campuses across multiple states. Bundy used a fake cast or impersonated authority figures to lure victims into traps. His normalcy made warning signs invisible to everyone around him. The catastrophe was a campaign of terror spanning nearly a decade. His method was calculated and cruel. He abducted his victims, and their remains were later found in remote wooded areas. His ability to blend into society made the search a desperate race against time. The human cost was staggering. At least 30 confirmed victims, though the true number may never be known. Families were left in perpetual agony. The manhunt was one of the largest in U.S. history, ending in a dramatic trial, where Bundy represented himself, tormenting the families. Ted Bundy's legacy is a horrifying lesson in human duality. He proved monsters don't always lurk in shadows. His case transformed law enforcement, inspiring modern criminal profiling and interstate cooperation that saves lives today. In a quiet Milwaukee apartment building, Jeffrey Dahmer lived a life of unassuming solitude. To his neighbors, he was shy, perhaps strange, but ultimately harmless. This concealed a gruesome reality, a world of loneliness that had curdled into a depraved obsession. The descent into madness was gradual. After losing his job, Dahmer's dark fantasies escalated. He lured young men back with promises of money or companionship. Warning signs, foul odors, sounds of drilling were dismissed by neighbors and fatally by police. The catastrophe within apartment 213 was a house of horrors. Dahmer's crimes involved the complete dehumanization of his victims. He kept trophies from his crimes, seeking to create a compliant companion to stave off his profound loneliness. This spoke to a complete inability to form any healthy human connection. The aftermath was a scene of profound disturbance. When a potential victim escaped in 1991 and led police back, they uncovered evidence of his many crimes. The discovery exposed the deaths of 17 young men and boys, raising painful questions about police negligence. Jeffrey Dahmer's story is a disturbing exploration of extreme psychological decay. His case forced a reckoning with race, homophobia, and the truth that profound evil can go unnoticed behind a single closed door. He was a pillar of his community, a successful contractor, a Democratic Party volunteer, and a registered clown named Pogo, who entertained children. John Wayne Gacy was the friendly neighbor in suburban Chicago, a man who shook hands with the powerful and smiled for cameras. But behind the painted smile and veneer of respectability, a sinister secret festered. Young men and boys connected to his construction business began to disappear. Gacy, with a prior conviction for assault, used his home as a hunting ground, his affable nature the perfect camouflage. The catastrophe was hidden beneath his floorboards. Gacy lured victims with promises of work, then committed his terrible acts. He used a rope trick, a grim parody of a magic act, to overpower them. For years, he lived above the remains of his victims, a secret graveyard. The human cost was horrific. After the disappearance of 15-year-old Robert Piest in 1978, investigators closed in. The search uncovered a crawl space containing the remains of 29 victims. 4 more were found in a nearby river. The sheer number of victims horrified the world. John Wayne Gacy became the definitive killer clown, a cultural boogeyman who taught us that trust can be a fatal vulnerability, and that evil often wears the most ordinary masks. She was a woman forged in the crucible of a brutal transient life on Florida's highways. Aileen Wuornos was a sex worker and drifter, living on society's absolute fringes. Her world was one of daily desperation and violence, a reality that soon exploded into deadly encounters. The buildup was a lifetime of severe trauma and abuse, fueling a growing rage. Wuornos claimed her acts were self-defense, desperate responses to abusive clients. This narrative unraveled as her victim count grew, suggesting a pattern beyond any single act of survival. The catastrophe was a year-long crime spree along Florida interstates. Between 1989 and 1990, Wuornos killed 7 men. Her method was direct and ruthless, a stark departure from the typical female killer profile. She was not a quiet poisoner, she was a predator. The aftermath was a high-profile investigation ending with her capture at a biker bar. Her case became a national media sensation, fueled by courtroom outbursts and a tragic backstory. The damsel of death captivated and horrified the public, blurring lines between victim and perpetrator. Aileen Wuornos' legacy is a complex, tragic chapter in criminal history. She challenged stereotypes and forced a difficult conversation about cycles of abuse, a cautionary tale about a society that abandons its most vulnerable. In Washington state's lush landscape, a shadow lingered for 2 decades. An ordinary man, a truck painter who attended church and remarried, Gary Ridgway moved undetected while committing unspeakable crimes against women. The buildup began in the early 1980s, as women, many sex workers and teenage runaways, disappeared from the Seattle-Tacoma corridor. Their bodies were found near the Green River, giving the killer his name. The investigation became the longest and most expensive in U.S. history, a frustrating hunt for a phantom. The catastrophe was a reign of terror lasting nearly 20 years. Ridgway was prolific and remorseless, leaving his victims in remote locations. He confessed to so many crimes he could no longer remember them all. The human cost is almost incomprehensible. Ridgway was convicted of 49 murders, but confessed to nearly double that number. For decades, families lived in agonizing limbo. His 2001 capture, made possible by a DNA breakthrough, finally brought answers, and laid bare the staggering scale of his depravity. Gary Ridgway's case is a chilling lesson in the banality of evil. Not a brilliant mastermind, but a simple, unremarkable man. His story underscores the importance of forensic science and the reality that monsters can be the men you never suspect. He was a family man, a church president, and a compliance officer in Park City, Kansas. Dennis Rader lived a life of mundane public service, priding himself on following rules. But this persona concealed a sadistic alter ego craving power and recognition. The buildup was a series of taunting letters sent to police and media. Calling himself BTK, for bind, torture, kill, Rader terrorized Wichita for decades. He sent poems and puzzles, reveling in the fear he caused, even complaining when his crimes lacked coverage, a narcissist demanding his dark spotlight. The catastrophe began in January 1974 with the murder of 4 Otero family members inside their home. For decades, Rader resurfaced periodically, breaking into homes and subjecting victims to terrifying rituals. He was a patient predator, capable of waiting years between attacks. The aftermath left a community paralyzed with fear for a generation. The BTK killer was a faceless threat who could be anyone. The case went cold until Rader's ego proved his undoing. In 2004, hungry for attention, he began communicating with police. Dennis Rader was caught after sending a floppy disk to a TV station, a digital breadcrumb traced to his church computer. His story is a reminder that the most monstrous can hide behind a mask of civic duty and normalcy. In the crumbling Soviet Union, he was a seemingly pathetic figure, a former teacher married with children, seen as meek and incompetent. Andrei Chikatilo was a product of a dysfunctional system, a man whose personal failures curdled into sadistic rage. The buildup was a series of horrific discoveries along railway lines and forests across Rostov Oblast. The remains of children and young women were found, showing signs of extreme violence. The investigation was crippled by bureaucratic incompetence and Soviet ideology, insisting serial murder was a capitalist phenomenon, a fatal mistake. The catastrophe was a 12-year reign of terror. Chikatilo stalked bus stops and train stations, preying on the vulnerable. He lured victims with promises of food or money, then committed his violent acts. The human cost was devastating. Chikatilo was convicted of taking 52 lives between 1978 and 1990. His victims were forgotten citizens of a failing state, their disappearances barely noticed. The investigation was a catalog of errors, allowing him to kill for over a decade while authorities pursued the wrong suspects. Andrei Chikatilo's case shows how a broken society can breed a monster. His capture exposed systemic flaws of the Soviet state and proved that evil flourishes in the shadows of denial and dysfunction. He was a trusted family doctor in the quiet English town of Hyde. Dr. Harold Shipman was a respected, even beloved figure, a man to whom hundreds of families entrusted their lives. His gentle manner concealed a chilling secret. making him the most prolific serial killer in modern history. The buildup was a statistical anomaly unnoticed for years. An unusually high number of Shipman's patients, especially elderly women, died at home. He calmly signed the death certificates himself, citing natural causes. The trust placed in him as a physician provided perfect cover. No one questioned him. The catastrophe was a quiet, methodical series of deaths disguised as routine care. For decades, Shipman administered lethal doses of medication to unsuspecting patients. During house calls, he was a cold clinical predator who held the power of life and death, and chose death repeatedly. The human cost was staggering. An official inquiry confirmed Shipman was responsible for the deaths of at least 215 patients, with the total estimated around 250. He acted for no clear motive, perhaps for the thrill of absolute control. His final act of greed, forging a patient's will, led to his arrest. Harold Shipman, or Dr. Death, shattered the most sacred trust in medicine. His case forced a complete overhaul of the British medical system, a symbol of evil cloaked in the robes of healing. In the chaotic energy of 19th century Chicago, a cunning doctor named H. Holmes built a monument to depravity. As the city prepared for the 1893 World's Fair, he constructed a hotel later called the Murder Castle, a labyrinth designed for death. The buildup was a web of fraud and deception. Holmes was a swindler, using charm to manipulate everyone around him. He financed his hotel through scams, constantly hiring and firing workers, so only he knew the building's sinister layout. The catastrophe was the hotel itself, a 3-story block of horror. A maze of windowless rooms, secret passages, and stairways to nowhere. It was designed to confuse and trap his victims. He preyed on tourists, employees, and lovers, turning his architectural marvel into a factory of crime. The human cost remains a mystery. Holmes confessed to 27 deaths, though speculation runs as high as 200. He profited from his crimes through fraudulent means. His castle was a testament to cold evil, a place where people checked in but never checked out. His capture came through an insurance fraud scheme. H. Holmes was America's first notorious serial killer. His murder castle is a symbol of Gilded Age horror, a man who used the anonymity of a booming city to construct his own private hell. In the isolated farmland of Plainfield, Wisconsin, Ed Gein lived as a recluse in a decaying farmhouse. After the death of his domineering, deeply religious mother, he was left entirely alone, a quiet, peculiar man holding the secrets of his grotesque madness. The buildup was a descent into morbid obsession. Gein began robbing graves, exhuming corpses of women who resembled his mother. He was driven by a twisted desire to preserve her memory and, perhaps, to become her, a fantasy that escalated from desecration to murder. The catastrophe was discovered in November 1957, when police investigating a missing hardware store owner entered Gein's home. They found a scene of unimaginable squalor and items crafted from human remains. He had created a horrifying collection of his own making. The aftermath sent shockwaves across the country. Gein was also linked to the death of a tavern owner years earlier. The true horror was not the number of victims, but the sheer depravity of his actions. He was a ghoul who erased the boundary between the living and the dead. Ed Gein, the Butcher of Plainfield, inspired cinema's most iconic villains, Norman Bates, Leatherface, and Buffalo Bill. His case revealed the darkest corners of psychosis, more disturbing than any fiction. In the sweltering summer of 1985, a suffocating fear gripped Los Angeles. A demonic figure moved through the night, slipping through unlocked windows and screen doors, leaving terror and satanic symbols. He was the Night Stalker. The buildup was a chaotic series of brutal home invasions. The killer's methods were inconsistent, different weapons, victims ranging from children to the elderly. This lack of pattern made him extraordinarily difficult to profile, deepening the city's panic throughout the long, hot summer. The catastrophe was a reign of terror defined by extreme cruelty. Richard Ramirez was a drifter fueled by dark ideologies. He broke into homes at night, committing a range of violent crimes against his victims, often leaving behind symbols of his beliefs. He reveled in the fear he created, a specter of pure evil. The human cost was 13 lives taken and countless others shattered. The city was under siege, with gun and lock sales soaring. The manhunt reached a fever pitch when his photograph was published. He was cornered not by police, but by furious East Los Angeles residents who held him until authorities arrived. Ramirez's capture by ordinary citizens ended a summer nightmare. His story is a reminder of the terror one individual can unleash on a city, a dark icon of an era when evil seemed to lurk at every window. In the late 1960s, a shadow fell over Northern California, a killer who craved attention as much as victims. He named himself the Zodiac and turned his crimes into a terrifying public game against police and press. The buildup was a series of cryptic, taunting letters sent to Bay Area newspapers. In them, he took credit for attacks, revealed details only he could know, and included elaborate ciphers daring authorities to decode. He threatened to act again if his letters weren't published, making the media his accomplice. The catastrophe was a string of brutal attacks on young couples in secluded lovers' lanes around San Francisco Bay. The Zodiac attacked his victims with cold efficiency, instilling deep fear. His terror extended to the murder of a lone taxi driver in the city, proving no one was safe. The human cost was at least 5 confirmed deaths, though he claimed 37 victims in his letters. For years, the Bay Area lived in fear, haunted by a killer who could be anyone: a neighbor, a coworker, a stranger. One of the most intense investigations in American history, yet the Zodiac was never identified. The Zodiac Killer's legacy is one of enduring mystery, a new breed of predator, a multimedia monster who used the press to build his legend. His unsolved case remains a permanent, open wound in American crime. He was a ghost drifting across a continent, a soft-spoken man preying on the innocent. In the 1970s, Pedro López began a criminal pilgrimage through South America, becoming what many criminologists consider the most prolific serial killer in history. The buildup was a trail of missing children across Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia. Indigenous girls from poor communities vanished at an alarming rate. The disappearances were so widespread and victims so marginalized that it took years for authorities to connect the cases and identify a single predator. The catastrophe was a crime spree on an industrial scale. López confessed to taking the lives of over 300 young girls. His method was simple. He earned their trust, lured them from village markets, then committed his crimes in isolated places. He exploited poverty and indifference to carry out his terrible acts. The human cost is almost too vast to grasp. In 1980, a flash flood in Ecuador unearthed a mass grave, leading to López's capture. He confessed to 110 deaths and led police to 53 confirmed graves. Convicted, he received only 16 years. Pedro López's story is a horrifying lesson in justice's failures. Released from a psychiatric facility in 1998, he vanished. The monster of the Andes is believed still at large, a reminder that the world's most evil men can slip through the cracks, free to hunt again. In the 1990s, terror swept across Colombia, a country already ravaged by decades of violence. A new monster had emerged, nicknamed La Bestia, or the Beast. Luis Garavito was a drifter and alcoholic who appeared non-threatening, a perfect disguise for his predatory evil. The buildup was the discovery of mass graves filled with children's bodies scattered across the country. The remains of young boys were unearthed from region to region. The scale was so immense that authorities initially suspected an organized cult, unable to accept a single individual could be responsible. The catastrophe was a 5-year crime wave of unimaginable brutality. Garavito preyed on street children and poor peasant boys using disguises, sometimes as a priest or charity worker, to gain trust. He offered food or money, led them on long walks, then committed his violent acts. The human cost is beyond comprehension. Garavito was linked to the deaths of 193 boys, but the true number likely exceeds 300. His 1999 capture revealed a predator who exploited his nation's chaos and poverty to become a one-man death squad targeting children. Garavito's case indicts a society that failed its most vulnerable. Despite the scale of his crimes, he was sentenced to only 22 years through a plea bargain, a troubling symbol of justice overwhelmed by the magnitude of evil. In the misty, mountainous heart of 17th century Hungary, a powerful noblewoman ruled with absolute authority. Countess Elizabeth Báthory was one of the wealthiest figures in the kingdom, but her castle concealed a dark secret that made her one of history's most terrifying figures. Whispers spread among the powerless peasantry. Young servant girls who traveled to Chejte Castle vanished without a trace. For years, the stories were dismissed as folklore, the fearful imaginings of a powerless class against an untouchable aristocrat. But the missing girls grew too numerous to ignore. The catastrophe was a system of cruelty and death inside the castle walls. Driven by sadistic vanity, Báthory held a belief that the essence of young virgins preserved her youth. She and her servants subjected hundreds of girls to unspeakable torments and fatal abuse. The human cost was staggering. About 80 victims were officially confirmed, but witness testimony suggested the true number exceeded 650. Because of her noble status, she was never formally tried or executed. Instead, she was sealed inside rooms in her own castle, left to die in darkness. Elizabeth Báthory, the Blood Countess, remains a figure of terrifying legend, a monster whose crimes blur fact and Gothic folklore. Her story is a testament to the corruption of unchecked power and a reminder that the darkest evil can flourish behind the highest walls. If you enjoy this kind of content, would you consider subscribing? It really helps the channel grow.